Welcome to Zcast, everyone. I'm ZS Caravala, and welcome to my last Zcast of 2022, although this may debut in the beginning of 2023. I'm joined by Catharine Trebnick from MKM Partners, who's a very well-known equity analyst in the world of communications and cloud and things like that. In fact, many of you watching probably know who she is. And we're here to do a little bit of a wrap-up on 2022, but more importantly, take a look at what we expect to see in 2023. So Catharine, why don't you say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you for having me today, Zias. I really enjoy our chats that we do. I know from Wall Street perspective, I always get a lot of people asking about you and asking for me to have a conversation with you. So this totally fits the end of the year. So my background is in unified communication. I've been on Wall Street for 15 years. Before that, I worked in industry at AT&T, Time Warner, and Level 3. Working as a VP of marketing and running really the service provider product management team. So happy to be on Wall Street, happy to cover the stocks, and seeing a lot of change coming out of 2022 into 23. And that's why I wanted to have the conversation with you, is to kind of maybe baseline what we think will happen starting in 2023 with unified communication stocks really are at a historic low, and I don't believe they'll remain there. And I wanted to talk to you about what you're seeing from a fundamental point of view, where you think things are headed in 2023.
Yeah, it's interesting that some of the valuations of these companies is lower than they were before the pandemic started, which is strange because basically the investors are saying that we think you're worth less today than you were, 2-3 years ago, even though the market has grown and even though these tools have kind of shown themselves to be an important part of life going forward. I do think there is a bit of a misunderstanding, though, of how these tools get used. And I think that created a bit of a lull this year. And I think part of the lull was created by businesses almost being paralyzed with how to do hybrid work. It's something that I've talked to a lot of business leaders and HR leaders and even IT pros about. And everybody, I think, would agree with the statement that work will be hybrid for the foreseeable future. But that's as far as the agreement goes. The process of how you get there, I think, still befuddles a lot of companies, right? We've seen lots of companies mandate you come back to the office. They've had to repeal it. We saw, good buddy Chuck Robbins there on CNBC saying he wants to make his office a magnet, not a mandate, right? And but there's no real best practice around hybrid work. The one thing I can tell you, though, from every conversation I've had with IT leaders is no matter how we go hybrid, whether it's people in the office 2 days a week or, you timeshare desks or whatever, unified communications tools will play an increasingly important role in enabling that. Because, if everybody's in the office, you can get, a pretty good experience with collaboration. And if everybody's remote, you can. The hard part, though, is when you have this hybrid world where some people are remote and some people aren't, and you have to create meeting equity that way. And that's what, the communications tools do. And they're getting smarter, right? There's a lot of AI capabilities being built into it that make our work life easier. And I think, with this lull we saw in 2022 was a bit of a transition period for the industry where it was trying to figure out what its next act was going to be. In parallel to that, businesses were trying to figure out what the future of work was going to be.
Yeah, definitely. You saw that. You had Zoom come off 300% year over year growth, kind of baseline to, 8 to 12% year over year growth. You see Ring Central that has been, 8 quarters in a row, over 30%, take their numbers back. And then you've had Avaya implode. Mm-hmm. Well, that's, I think, what we talked before we got on, not totally unexpected. And then you have 8x8 that had recently a new management change because they didn't really execute to the plan. So I think in terms of my speaking to the channel partners in IT, I do agree with you that hybrid is here to stay. Nobody really understands it. And you're starting to see new tools evolve. Like you're seeing Microsoft say, well, we're going to integrate whiteboard to make it easier. Zoom just added the chat feature to make it more, well, they had it, but they added whiteboard in there. So I agree with you. There are a lot of changes going on with each of the companies to make it more amicable or easier to use from the end user.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of the new AI capabilities are being directed at pre and post meeting stuff, right? So I think a lot of the AI capabilities today with real-time translation and noise block and stuff like that are great for the meeting like we're in now. But I know WebEx is working on meeting summaries where instead of just giving you a transcription, it'll actually summarize the meeting for you, right? And things like that. So if you think about a meeting lifecycle, there's stuff you do pre-meeting, stuff you do during the meeting, stuff you do post-meeting. I think most of the vendors have focused their innovation on the stuff you do in the meeting, and now you're starting to see pre and post-meeting experiences be brought into this. And I've used the analogy. It's like if you're if you're a real high-level executive, you have a personal assistant that follows you around and whispers everything in your ear, right? We don't have that, but AI can take that role. And I think we're on the cusp of seeing another wave of innovation into the space.
Yeah, and then in terms of we had talked earlier about ChatGPT, right? And saying that that's another avenue where I was asking you, do you think ChatGPT would be acquired by like a Zoom who's trying to really come out of their just meeting orientation, really be a more robust communication suite? And I wanted to know what your thoughts on that were.
Yeah, I don't know if right now if they do. Like their ChatGPT is at probably the peak of its hype cycle. It reminds me a lot of Clubhouse a couple of years ago, where Clubhouse became the thing to join, right? And it was so hot that you had to get invited to join it and things like that. So, and then eventually what happened was Clubhouse was a good idea. I don't know if it's a great idea for just a consumer tool for people to go on and talk about, Harley Davidsons or something like that, or pop culture. But if you are trying to create birds of a feather communities within a company, you could use it to do, have HR have a benefits meeting, right? And have everybody come on virtually, that sort of thing. And you saw Twitter add that capability with Twitter Spaces. Zoom added that capability. I think Cisco has something that's similar to it and stuff. So Clubhouse over time morphed into just a feature of other platforms. And I've talked to people about the engine behind ChatGPT, and it's not super complicated. It does almost like a scrape of the internet on, we were talking about the Winston Churchill essay. Well, that's not a very hard model to build, right? You just got to go do a Google search on all the Winston Churchill stuff and organize it in a way, that makes sense and stuff. So that's something I do think has some applicability, in business. Like, for example, you and I could have a standing meeting every month, for the year. And then at the end of the year, something like ChatGPT could analyze it and give us an essay of what that looked like, right? But I do think it's something most of the vendors could build. They may get acquired down the road, but I think right now their valuation is probably too high. And I suspect it's going to come down over time as the hype around it dies. But when that happens, it could become an acquisition candidate.
Yeah, and for the communication space, it's more like you're saying, very useful during and out of meeting summary type thing.
Yeah, but I think
the other one,
I don't think it's a company.
Right. The other question I get a lot on Wall Street is M&A heading into 2023, and this is where I wanted to get your opinion too, because there's been the No Jitter articles, one of which you're an author of, talking about 8x8 and Ring Central. And I wanted to get, let's talk about that in real time. I really don't see that happening, but I wanted to talk to someone else that agreed with me or disagreed with me.
Yeah. So the question is, why, right? Like if we, and it seems like every year when I read predictions for the UC space, Catherine, there's always predictions that this will be the year that we see more M&A. And I do think there are a lot of UCaaS providers and CCaaS providers, and logically you would think that we would, but I don't think you start to see serious M&A until the market gets somewhat mature, and consolidation is the only way to gain share. And if you look at the UC space today, Zoom claimed 4 million seats, Ring claims 5, WebEx is claiming 6, right? So that's 15. Microsoft says they have 12, which I don't really believe, but let's give it to them. So that's 27.
Yeah.
Everybody has 2s, and say everybody else has 1. So that'd be 30 million seats.
Yeah. Out of 400
that's
million.
less than 10% penetrated of the overall 400 million best business desktops out there. And so you could spend the money trying to buy a company and acquire, or you could put that money into lead gen, into conversions of legacy seats and things like that. Go after the legacy install bases, and that would probably serve you better, from a growth perspective than trying to buy a company and acquire it in. So I'm not saying we're not going to see any M&A. I certainly think there's a lot of, niche companies out there. There's conversational AI companies, things like that you could bring in and drop in. There are, the vertically focused UCaaS vendors. There's ones that are regionally specific, and so if 8x8 wanted, or say Ring wanted to go expand their footprint in Asia Pac or something, they might go after one that has presence there. But I don't think we're going to see this big sweeping consolidation. And to me, Ring and 8x8 don't really make a lot of sense, just because I don't think Ring needs them to grow share. I think they can continue to do so on their own. In fact, if they just executed better on all their partnerships, that would do more for them, right? And so there's a lot of product overlap, and it's just, like I said, if the market was more matured and we were 50% penetrated, I could buy into that, but I don't buy into it at this rate of overall penetration.
The other part that I don't give it a plus on either is you don't really, with 8x8 putting a lot of emphasis now with the new CEO on contact center and building out feature functionality and really trying to gain par and lead. Where does that leave Ring Central with their partnership with InContact? And they also have a contact center themselves that they built that's more like for a Grand Rapids, Michigan Subaru dealership, right? Very limited functionality, but good distribution. So I'm like, well, then why would that? So that seems like one part that they really would mess up another partnership that they do very well with. And they're very integrated with the Ring Central and InContact, and the Salesforce and the channel people really sell the whole UCCC experience together. So that's another reason why I kind of hesitated on it.
I think InContact and Ring is a little bit like, the expression when you're married, right? You can't live with them, you can't live without them. And I do think, ultimately, if Ring had their own contact center and they were recouping all that money, that they're maybe paying out in partnership, that would be better for them. But the fact that they win a lot of contact center deals is because it's InContact. It's because it's an MQ leading product, right? So from that perspective, they can't really upset that apple cart. And and I do think they're the UC vendor. They're the UC vendor that drives more contact center sales than any other, maybe than all the other UC vendors combined. Right?
Yeah.
But they're able to do that because it's within contact. And so it's an interesting kind of
relationship that works. That works very well. Yeah, now that we're on contact center, 5 nines. Rowan left, Mike stepped back in, to run it. The stock again originally didn't react well to Rowan leaving. Do you know where he's headed? I have no idea.
Yeah, he's going to he announced it on LinkedIn. It's like a database AI company or something like that. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not in the space, and he was very clear that he didn't want it to be in the space. So it's Redis, it's a devs company, right? So, but I don't think they're going to skip a beat. I mean, Rowan picked up what they were doing, and Rowan's a great exec. There's no question about that. But it was a little bit of right time, right place, right time, also. And it's a very seasoned management team. They know 90% of the quarter going into the quarter. They're really the best-in-class CCaaS vendor in another market that's largely underpenetrated, right?
Right.
Like a very small percent of the, CCaaS seats have moved to the cloud. And, I was talking with one of the AWS Connect folks, and I said, when you guys consider acquiring, to grow some share, he goes, I don't think we need to. He said, we just, there's so much opportunity out there. If we just go execute well, we'll grow, right? And I think that's what you're seeing in that space. And I do think the CCaaS space is a lot more resilient than the UCaaS space. I think no matter whether people go back to work or go back to the office or shop online or shop in store or do curbside pickup or you need a contact center. And it's and you need a really good contact center with a lot of automated capabilities to smooth out all these peaks and valleys that you get. You look what's happening in the airline industry now with travel. Their contact centers are getting bombarded. You know, I was trying to fly myself the other day, and I couldn't, you know, get through the airline I was calling, so but I used the chat feature, and that worked, you know, that was a lot faster and stuff. So having a really rich omni-channel, you know, set of capabilities in a world where there's a lot of unpredictability, I think is necessary to survival. And so that's awfully hard to build that with a prem system. You know, and you know, scale and everything else just lends itself to cloud. I think this is an industry we're going to see move faster and faster to that end.
Yeah, the airline industry, I think, will propel some people to start executing or developing better contact center channels. I mean, that's really going to be a big brand hit, like at Southwest Airlines. And that's another reason to have really good contact center experience. Speaking of contact center, so Amazon contact center keeps coming up in a lot of the conversations I've had from like 3 years ago when they first announced it. It seems like that's doing almost better than Twilio's Flex. And then you have now Google having their CCAI, and then now you even have Zoom in the contact center space. Do you think there's enough room for all these guys, or you think it'll be segmented by large enterprise, small enterprise?
Yeah, I do think I think there is, with some caveats. So I do think AWS is rocking it in the contact center space. They are executing as well as you can. I don't really understand the folks at Gartner not having them as a leader in the MQ. In fact, I was looking at you know, Vonage, I think, is a higher ability to execute in the MQ than AWS. And frankly, I don't know any company that has a higher ability to execute than AWS. I mean, right? I mean, they have almost unlimited resources, but I do think that their pricing model, being capacity based, is a real differentiator for businesses that are seasonal. I talked to the person that runs a contact center at Hilton, and she said that without their pricing model, they would have had to overspend so high, right? And you know, that she's been trying to get every SaaS vendor to move that way. And you think about it, why isn't every SaaS vendor utilization based, right? That's the whole point of the cloud. But you know, that's, you know, I guess topic for another day. I think Zoom will have some success because people like Zoom. There's a real, of all the communication companies, they have the strongest emotional attachment from the user audience. You know, I was talking with the CIO the other day who was looking at Zoom and a couple of its competitors, and he had picked for, you know, not for contact center, for Zoom, he had picked a competitor, and the user base wanted Zoom, so he went with Zoom. And so I do think there's a lot of emotional attachment there. And then now Google, I don't know, is Google ever going to do anything serious? You know,
No.
Right? And so I think the partnership with UJet is, I think they're fishing. The problem with Google is they don't really do anything enterprise well. They get it to a certain, like 80%, they experiment with it, and I don't think contact center is something you can do half in, half out, right? I think you got to be all in, and that's why I'm even skeptical of Microsoft in this space, because Microsoft's the king of good enough. And that might work in meetings and stuff, but it won't work in contact center. So the other one I asked, oh yeah, Twilio, you know, it's funny because they and AWS came out at the same time as being the developer friendly contact center, but AWS has stretched its lead. And the thing that AWS has done well is both companies, you know, serve off, here's your Legos and you go build what you want. But then AWS recognized that, well, some customers want pre-built Legos and some people want the full kit built, and you can consume Connect any way you want, where Twilio has largely stayed Legos. And that is a very small kind of addressable audience today. And so I think they've, you know, I'm not, and I'm ready, you know, and they've been very distracted since the Segment acquisition, which I think is a good acquisition. But I don't, you know, I'm not convinced Twilio will ever have any, you know, real contact center chops. So
yeah, it seems like they're really focused on the Segment acquisition, and that whole MarTech space is really interesting space too, for another discussion another time. Yeah, and then talking about a CCAS. So 5.9s, I think, a lot of the people said, or folks were saying, hey, well, Rowan's not at the top. Mike was the original leader of the company and brought it, for almost 8 years to where it was before Rowan took over. And he's been acting as a very active chairman, even being out with his cancer treatment. So I don't really think, I agree with you that they're going to miss a leg. He knows how to execute. He knows how to run his team. I think they're in good hands.
Yeah, I think they're very good hands. I mean, people forget Mike was the CEO there before. He had a lot of success there, and had it not been for cancer, he would not have stepped down. Right?
Yeah,
So,
and what's with the troubles that Avaya is having, both on just the IPPBX and their partners, and then also on the contact center piece of it. I'm wondering if you think that they're going to be able to. That's been such a loyal base to them. Like Target would never move off through their last bankruptcy. They really were a loyal customer. Do you start to see them actually, some customers moving away in the future, and maybe F5.9s could grab some of those, or Amazon?
yeah, I don't think there's any question that if they Chapter 11 again, they're going to. It'd be hard for me to imagine them not losing any customers, right? Like they did last time. I do think though the Avaya install base is oddly loyal. To a company that was largely mismanaged the last 5 years, right? And the whole Jim Chirico era was one big ball of mismanagement, you could argue. But the products are good, and the install base is really loyal, especially on the international side. I was out at GITEX, and I met a handful of their customers, and I asked them, I said, does it give you any cause for concern, the bankruptcy? And no, he goes, we trust them. They've not let us down before. And we will stick with them. And so they've got a very loyal install base that, and while we talk about a rapid movement to the cloud, I do think the area of Avaya is unique in, it's Cisco, you could argue, can do this as well, is deliver a private cloud version and a hybrid cloud version. And even to the point where it's like a virtual private, where you run an instance of it in Amazon or in Google or something like that, right? So the customer wants the benefits and the scale of cloud, but they want their data separated. And I've talked to a number of Avaya customers about this, right? That had looked at moving to a CCaaS product, and you start asking about, well, do you care where your data is? And they go, well, we have to, because we're a financial firm, right? They want control of it. They want to control the security. And I'm not saying one's more secure than the other, but they just want control over the security. And that points you to, private cloud or hybrid cloud. And I think, that's an area that I haven't seen any of the CCaaS vendors do yet, but I do think they eventually will have to.
All right, and the final one before we go would be Zoom and their email and calendaring application they announced at Zoomtopia. So my take is that looks like a productivity play and they're building up a communication suite, but how do you really think that affects the large enterprise customer versus the SMB?
I think it's noise to the large enterprise. I'm not sure it matters there at all. I think if Zoom is going to have success with it, it'll be down market first. I will say though, like I said, people, and I think when they released it, people misunderstood what it was, right? While Zoom does have their own calendar and email service that you can use, they do they do integrate with Outlook and with Google, with Gmail. And so the idea would be that Zoom becomes your single pane of glass, if you will, for work. And then you're able to see your Zoom chat, your Google Mail, your Google Calendar or Microsoft, as well as use it for meetings, right? And so it'll be interesting to see if people were willing to change the interface over. I think it's a hard sell in large enterprise, but down in the small market, mid-market, where you're maybe looking to rationalize costs and things like that, and you're probably not as reliant on email as you are in the large enterprise, right?
Right.
A lot of smaller companies I've talked to have almost been able to shed email for chat. you could see them maybe taking a look at it. But I think that's a tough market. Really tough competitors in that space. So, but I do think because Zoom does, when they do go into markets, they do it pretty well. They listen to customers. I do think they can have some success in the small market, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah. I think it's more, I was thinking of it when after reading it and having the Zoom head of IR on a virtual fireside chat just about a week ago, I'm leaving more thinking they're really headed towards productivity. And that's why I asked you about the ChatGPT, because I'm like, if that's where they're headed, that could be a good play for them. And this could be just the start of really driving more productivity tools. So
yeah, but I do think, Catherine, I think what you saw there is a bit of a sign of things to look for in the future, right? So where we might see some M&A from a Zoom perspective, they rolled into contact center, so now they need sort of some adjacencies, workforce automation, things like that. In the productivity space, right? There's file sharing tools like companies like Box and things like that, right? So there's still a lot of adjacencies here in the world of contact center and collaboration that can lend itself to acquisitions that aren't solely for consolidation, right? And so your question around acquisitions, I'm not saying we're not going to see any. In fact, I think we will see a healthy M&A year. It just won't be kind of the 8x8 ring central consolidation.
No, and I agree with you on that. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have the chat, is because besides me just hammering it, like I just don't see that as a fit. Now we both could be like wrong, but
yeah.
I just don't see it as a fit.
Yeah, hopefully by the time this airs, we won't have
people
announcing they're being acquired by Ring, right? So
totally. Well, I appreciate you having me today, and thanks for all the times we have the conversation. I know my readers are excited and had asked me to get a hold of you before the end of the year. So
all right.
Take care.
So on behalf of Catherine, I'm Zias Caravella. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see all of you, including you, Catherine, in 2023.